Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tulā Community Podcast. I am very happy to have you here and happy that you are tuning in to another episode with us. It is a very rainy morning this morning in Vancouver as I'm recording this, and so I hope that you, if you are also enjoying a rainy morning right now, that you are cozy. And if you're listening to this while it's warm outside, that you are staying cool and everything is well balanced for you over there. In this episode, I talked to my good friend, Danielle Clarke. And we met a couple years ago now in teacher training and just getting connected within, of course, the Vancouver yoga community. Big community, but small nonetheless, because we kind of all know each other for the most part. And she's just finished her master's program, and she has been doing work in eco-embodiment and work with her business that she's putting together, and it's already kind of together, of course, but called Ever Being. And we talk about her research in her thesis that she completed in her master's program, and we talk about this wonderful program that she's put together, and something that for me feels very special and unique. And I really do feel like when I'm spending time with her or learning or anything like that, when I'm with her, that I really am with a great mind. She's a very special person. And I'm excited for you to listen to these little bits of knowledge that she's able to share now. And more about Danielle and Ever Being in her own words. Ever Being develops and facilitates environmental workshops and programs that are inclusive of the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of the self and the more than human world, promoting stewardship and advocacy for the earth. Its mission is to bolster human nature interconnection and cultivate sustainability through eco-embodiment practices rooted in traditional and scientific knowledge systems. Founder and environmental educator Danielle Clarke is a certified registered yoga teacher who holds a master's in environmental education and communication and is committed to providing individuals with the tools they need to navigate the current climate crisis. And one last thing before we get started into this episode, I just want to take this time to share with you about a wonderful company based out of British Columbia. And this company is called Bee Half Moon. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. I know that some of you have heard of it. But I want to take this time to share with you, of course, because in our episode, we will be talking about yoga quite a bit. And it may be something that helps you to feel either re-inspired or reminds you of your practice or anything like that. And so I want to share with you kind of some news about them. And in the last few months, they've recently merged two of their sister companies. So this was Half Moon, which has yoga props and really truly some of the best yoga props that you can find, just really nice quality and a wonderful aesthetic as well. And Bee Yoga, which has more fitness related props, and again something where you get that same quality, and I would say the aesthetic is also very beautiful. So I want to take this time to share with you about them and just to let you know of our code here with Tulā, and that you're welcome to use it to get yourself a little bit of savings. And the code itself is Tulā Yoga 15, and I've linked below that for you to use, or if you want to just take a gander and see what they've got over there. Again, thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you enjoy this episode. Okay, everybody, I'm here with my wonderful pal Danielle, and she's gonna teach us some good stuff today. But I'll let her introduce herself first. So go ahead.
Well, thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here. I am going to be sharing a little bit about my research with you. I just finished my master's in environmental education and communication. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, you're so welcome. I'm excited to learn about it because I do feel genuinely excited about it. Like I feel like it aligns really well with all of the Tulā stuff, which is quite nice. Cool. And I feel like when I was reading your thesis the last few days, and like knowing you, of course, too, and all the things that you're doing, I felt excited to like have this conversation because I know us and how we feel about yoga and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But I felt like excited to sit across from you and have you share all of this great knowledge that you have, and to like to share this time with you, because I feel like you are so intelligent, and it's just it's a really wonderful thing that you've like put together here, and I feel very proud of you.
Thanks.
Yes, you're very welcome. So I'm really excited about the episode because I feel excited about all of them, but I feel excited about this one for sure because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. It works so well for how I feel about life, and same with you, you know.
That makes me so happy, and I think in a sense that does speak to what this research was about. It was sort of, it's coming in a timely manner. Like, this is something that I think the world needs right now. Yeah. This essence of education that includes emotion and sensation and feeling, and taking that into the outdoor world is and can be, which this research has sort of proven, is so powerful. So yeah, maybe I'll dive into a little bit about why I did the research, because it is a passion of mine. Basically, when I think back, my relationship with yoga and with ecology has always been sort of similar. There's like this symmetry, this dance between the two that I've always felt. And I think it comes back to the sense of feeling interconnected. When I'm outside, I'm related to the outdoor world. And when I'm in yoga classes, or, you know, however I'm practicing that day, I feel connected to myself, but also the other. And so there is that symmetry there, and this sense of compassion for all other beings, right? So looking back through my life, I've had that journey, and then applying for this master's, I felt like it was a way to resource myself with the theoretical knowledge that I needed, kind of, as you said, to academically bring this information forward, to share this wisdom, and make it known. So the way that I did that was creating a place-responsive eco-embodiment program that I called Outdoor Eco Yoga. So the research itself has kind of a fun title. It's called Rooted in the Earth, Becoming Aware of the Ecological Self Through Outdoor Eco Yoga. I just wanted to understand my participants' relationship to themselves in place. So it was a fun journey.
Right. And then so in doing that, what was the way that you went about studying that with people? Like, how did you put that into place? Or what was your first kind of idea? And did it change as you went along?
Totally. It absolutely evolved. And I think that's part of how this research was done. Like, it was so emergent, and the methodology behind it, like, it was meant to be that way. I wanted the participants to create the knowledge within themselves, because that's where this was all coming from, right? And being a yogi, you understand, like, we learn through our own experiences, and that's so important. So I thought a way into this sort of inner knowing was to help facilitate, or I guess semi-facilitate, a pilot program. So that was the creation and development of pedagogy and curriculum that we can get into, but it essentially led itself to an 8-week program. And the first and last week of that program was focus groups, so bringing together my 4 participants to ask them specifically about their experience in sort of a group setting. Right. And then for the middle 6 weeks of that, they really had time to go and explore the curriculum that I created. Right. So minimum 1 hour a week, they went out and did whatever activity, whatever embodiment practice that I had offered.
Right. And then did you go about choosing this group in a certain way? Was it just people who were willing to do it, or were you thinking like, I want people from different age groups, or what? Like, did you go about it that way?
Yeah, it was hard at first, you know, because I know that I wanted to have like the most diversity possible, right? Yeah. But then how do you get that diversity when at the end of the day you're asking for people to volunteer their time? Right. Yeah. And
that can be hard.
Totally. It can be really hard. And so you know, I ended up getting an array of people who had different backgrounds with yoga. And so I went, you know, my 4 participants, one was an instructor, a certified instructor, one was a practitioner, and then 2 were relatively new but interested in yoga. What they all shared was an interest in the environment and the outdoors, recreationally, and also, you know, advocating for the earth in some sense or another. So they did share that, but in terms of their experience with this embodied knowledge, it was a little bit diverse in a sense. Yeah.
Right. did you find like what were the things that you offered to them in a yogic sense? So you said now that you like found that they were more naturally inclined to like be outdoorsy, if you will, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you offered to them, what was it yogically? What did you offer to them? Like, did you give them like a kind of class or a sequence to take, or like breath work practices or to do, or what was it?
Yeah. So an array of things again. The pedagogy itself or the curriculum that came was a companion guide. So each participant took home their own, I think it was like 50 pages, and then it was broken into 3 phases throughout the program, and each phase had a weekly session. Okay, so that session was broken up into an hour. So it wasn't all asana, it wasn't all the physical practice. We definitely got into pranayama, some breath work. I think the most in terms of like physical body movement I had them do, I think one of the days over the 8 weeks, they had one sun salutation.
Right.
So that was the most asana that we got into.
Okay.
Yeah, like pretty minimal.
That's good. It's nice to hear that.
Yeah.
I always feel really happy to hear that. Like
right?
as a teacher, I just am like, okay, good. So it wasn't just like all these things you always see.
No, and you want it to be accessible. You want everyone to be able to like dive into the world of yoga. And first of all, the physical postures can be really accessible. Yes. Like the sun sal, I offered a range of, you can do, chaturanga, up dog, you can do all that.
Right.
Or you can do cat cow. You can get down hands and knees and just, breathe.
Just nice breath work with nice repetitive movement.
Totally.
Nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was all of that, and you bring it in, but you want to kind of like de-westernize this like physical aspect that's always or tends to always be there. Right? So it was, how can I show that this this beautiful traditional practice from India actually offers so much more.
Right.
And I do think that that's something I've been struggling with this research, is as I've been talking about, this outdoor eco-embodiment. If I say outdoor eco-yoga, right, it's like, I know what yoga is.
Like, of course.
Right?
Yeah. It's hard to rewrite that script for people, for sure.
Totally.
And did you find that like your participants, like, do you feel that all of them had a deeper understanding of yoga, maybe just from knowing you, maybe like, like they might see something different from what you're sharing, or did you find that they were like, obviously they learned something, but did they learn like a lot new things that they didn't know of before in yoga?
I think so. I think some of the things that stuck with me, or that stand out, I guess, are the sort of the aspect of emotion. I think that a lot of people, if you think about going to a yoga class, it's 60 minutes, inside a room, you're breathing, you're moving your body, you're getting integrated, and maybe you have an emotional release, but it's not facilitated. Right. And this program was really like learning the language of the body so that you can speak with the earth and with yourself, right? And when you learn to do that, there is like this whirlwind of emotions that come with that. And then this toolkit that, I'm trying to provide, co-facilitated, if you will, with the earth, is like, okay, now let this particular activity or this particular breath work, pranayama, let this help deal with that anxiety, right? Let's tap into the parasympathetic nervous system. Let's slow down, and let's like, one of the things my participant did one day when they were going through it was they started breathing with the waves. And that was so soothing, and that's facilitated by the earth, right? Like that's not something I could have taught, right? Like sure, I offered you breath work 1 week, and then that felt good, and then you just naturally integrated it.
That's right.
Like this is the living eco yoga that I really like am trying to bring to people. Is once it reaches this threshold of like, now it's been facilitated enough times. You've done week 1, week 2, week 3 of the program. Okay, I'm starting to see participants telling me experiences that I didn't put in there, right? That they're like coming back to my interviews or, my focus groups, and they're sharing like, I did this and I integrated this, and, it's so powerful. You can see that it's taken on a life of its own.
Right.
Like what more could you want?
Yeah, for sure. And then in that, I guess you might not have been prepared for some things yourself, because sometimes I find too with students with emotional things, I don't mind it. Like I enjoy it, of course, right? Like it's nice to be able to be in that space with people, but sometimes you're not always prepared for that, or you didn't think, like, you knew that it would come up in your program, but you're like, I didn't really know, like, it was gonna be like this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And there's lots to learn there.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the program, participants were like, well, now what? You know, like, it was like, well, now where do I go? And I'm like, I like, take everything and, you know, keep practicing or try a different, like, so one of the big things about this research was place responsiveness. So site sitting is another way that we talk about it. So taking yourself into a particular place, over a period of time repeatedly. Right? And so
going back to the same spot that is, like, maybe, I guess, like a spot they like, nature spot.
Totally. And they chose this spot at the beginning of the program. You know, and the first session. These are
separate for each person?
Absolutely.
Like, each person goes somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, and it can be facilitated differently. For the research, because I wanted it to be very accessible, everyone went and chose their own spots close to home.
Right.
If I were to facilitate this, you know, again, in a sort of like more intensive setting where everyone's together, I would still have people choose their own spot, but it would be, you know, within a framework or a place.
Right.
But I told them, go find somewhere that kind of calls to you, let yourself feel drawn to a place for whatever reason. And, you know, we talked about what those reasons were after they chose, and it was really, it was like comfort.
Yeah.
It was
familiar.
Feeling safe, familiar. And then a big one that came up was this like spiritual aspect, which, you know, none of them really knew how to articulate. Towards the end of the program, we got towards maybe articulating those feelings a little bit more. But initially it was like, well, I don't know, it felt right. Okay, so let's talk about what does that feeling feel like, right? Like learning that language, because I think we've been taught that language is like lesser than. And giving that, speaking it gives it a voice, and when you give it a voice, it's got power.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so like bringing that back into people's lives is just, it's really cool. So I had them site sitting. I brought them to all these, I let them find their own spot.
Yeah.
They kept revisiting. And the idea with the site sitting is that when you revisit the same place over a duration of time, you're witnessing change, right? You're being present for everything. And, you know, what was fun about this program was it was over 8 weeks. So we were on a shoulder season. We sort of witnessed this transformation.
What season was it? When did it start?
We started at the end of winter and we sort of moved into spring.
That's really nice.
So it was really cool.
Yeah, it's a nice transition.
Yeah.
Always like everything just coming back to life.
Totally.
It's very special season, actually. It's very powerful.
Yeah. If you ever get a chance to look at the research, I had them draw place maps beginning, you know, first week and last week, and the amount of there was quite a lot of depth in change, I think, from what I was perceiving, and from what they shared with me in the data. But, you know, I saw like a lot more. Initially it was like bird's eye view, this is my map, and then when they were leaving the place, it was like them sitting in the spot. Like some of them even included themselves, and you know, previously hadn't included themselves. Or there was color, you know, it was like spring, it's like flowers blooming, like the sun's out. It was just so fun to like witness there and hear about that transformation in and of themselves.
It sounds like they became a lot more open to the experience, and also like more immersed, like just ready to be more immersed in that too, you know, just like putting in things like color, but also like putting themselves actually in the image, and they didn't maybe do that at the first thing, and that it had an effect on them or for them. That's cool.
It was very cool to witness and see it, because that's what it was, right? It was like, okay, this is, as I mentioned off the top, this my personal sort of inner knowing, my experience with yoga and ecology has been this interconnectedness, and it has been powerful in helping me heal and move in the world. And then, you know, how do I facilitate that as research, you know, and experience or explore other people's exploration of that journey,
right?
You know, being careful of where my bias might tie in, right? And so I caked that right into the research. It was like, I'm transparent, like this is my you know, this is my background. I'm a yoga instructor, and I love the environment, and you know, I'm curious to see how this moves you, right? And I just let them go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And did you check in with them every week or something like that? Was that
about every other week?
Every other week.
Yeah. First and last week, and then over the 6 weeks. So basically once per phase. They had 3 phases.
Right. Oh, their names.
Yeah, the phases were fun. I'm just looking at that here. So when I created the pedagogy, I created it as sort of like a sphere that had rings, and the idea was to like ripple like water, and we can get into this fun metaphor
of course, yeah,
in a moment.
Okay.
But the outer ring is Gaia, so Mother Earth. And then the middle, as we move inwards, we have community, and this was inclusive of the more than human world, so inclusive of our non-human kin.
Right.
And then the innermost ring was self. So those are sort of the three phases. We went from Gaia to community to self. What was cool was that at the end of the program, they sort of came up with these little subheadings on their own as I was, collecting data from the participants and asking them about their experience in each phase. When I heard them speaking about Gaia, it was, them seeing themselves in the earth. Right? They could see themselves in the earth. Okay, yeah, I'm here. I'm with whatever. I'm with my sit spot. I'm with this place. I'm with this land. When we moved into the community phase, they could see themselves with the earth. So there was sort of this transition from like, I'm not just in it, like I'm with it, like I'm part of it, I'm connected, right? And that was sort of that facilitation through the difference in activities, and then their own exploration, right? Finally, it was self. And that was to see the earth in myself. So now it sort of like flipped itself on its head, and it was, like just hearing them talk about themselves in this new perspective. Like, I think that was the biggest thing that came out of this research, was this transformational map that they had now created for themselves to move on with in their lives, right? Like being in a place, being with the place, and then being one of the same with that place, weird.
Yes.
But it's true.
It is like very reflective of just the journey of yoga in and of itself, outside of eco yoga, because it is true. You know how you start yoga and you start practicing and doing this and doing that, and then little bit by little bit, like it does get turned on its head after a while, and you're like, holy Hannah, like this is wild, and then you do have like almost, there's like a veil obviously that gets lifted, or like a threshold that you get through, and then you're like, oh wow, like I thought I was doing the work, but like I was, but like now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm really like, I'm crying, like what's going on?
There's like so much more work.
And then emotions and stuff like that start to come up, and I think like until you have that break, then you're really in it, like now you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really seeing things differently.
Totally, absolutely, it absolutely felt like that. I should add that I guess I said the innermost, but there is one more layer in this pedagogy, and that was the 8 limbs of yoga. So I wanted those to be at the core, at the center of this pedagogy, because I wanted to include something more than just the asana, right? I wanted yoga to have more limbs, more layers, more petals, and so that's kind of how it started. But the metaphor that I kind of went with when I was, I stepped back after I drew out this pedagogy. So you think about dropping a stone into the center of the pedagogy itself. And then when the initial splashes sort of come up, those little 8 ripples or 8 droplets become the limbs, right? The 8 limbs of yoga. And then it ripples out into those 3 phases, right? So self, community, Gaia. The idea is that as the stone falls towards the earth, okay, and the outer splashes begin to settle, they might seem isolated at first, right? But then as it settles, it all becomes this like one, right? So we're creating this illusion of oneness, or maybe the reality of oneness.
Right.
And the pedagogy basically becomes this interconnected thing.
Yeah.
Okay. The stone meets the earth, and that's sort of meant to symbolize the shedding of this small s self towards this interconnected landing, connecting to the earth, this larger S self, this spiritual self.
Right.
So I feel like when I look at this pedagogy and I teach this pedagogy, I'm not just teaching like the academia of it. I'm trying to teach it in a tangible sense that lives in metaphor and can exist in a different capacity.
Yeah, and sometimes I find that the understanding that you will have as the facilitator or the teacher or the creator of a program in and of itself always has to be quite involved. Like you have to feel like like how they say like you need to know a lot to teach something kind of thing. It's like that. But then you have to simplify it a lot, not because people don't understand, but because like you have this grand understanding of so much, and you've got so much going on. Like you've created this, and you're like, okay, I got my ideas, but you can't just come to someone teaching them from out the gate like all of these things or whatever. You have to kind of like little bit by little bit just kind of plant those seeds and kind of share or whatever, and then eventually they start to have that same understanding as well, or they come up with their own understanding of what it may be, you know. But when you are creating something like this, your understanding is going to be so vast and well versed, you know. Absolutely.
I think the other thing that I learned in doing this was it was when do I share the knowledge, right? Like the theoretical knowledge before they experience it or after they experience it, right? And that was something that came up, and I think what I really learned from this research was it's way more powerful to wait for them to experientially explore it and then knowledge drop, right? Like this is something, this has a name, right? We do this, like this is called sight sitting, right? Or this is place responsiveness, or that, you know, like you can give those words or those experiences a word, a meaning, a label, if you will, right? But I think if you give the word first, it almost like reduces it to the word and the definition, and if you experience it, it's like, you know, it's that felt sensation. It's like, oh, I totally know what you mean. Yeah, right? You know,
I think people can become fixed in that when you do give them words or information first. Yeah. And so it is really nice to, similar to what we said before, like just experience it for yourself, but like the same thing, allow people to experience things for themselves. Yeah. And then go from there.
Because it's almost like, you know, think of a time someone told you the definition for a word, whatever the word. Yeah. And then you're just like, oh, cool, I know it now. Yes. Done. Yeah. Right? Like you kind of just like tick the box. You're like, oh yeah, of course that's what that is, right? Yes. But then like, is it? Right. Is it really what that is?
Well, and I feel like you're trying to also, like, not only, like, I feel like this is the first time you've ever really done this program, I'd imagine, right? Yeah. And so, like, for you, it's also learning, it's a, like, pilot thing for you as well, and so you have to also take in what they experience, too. You can't tell them too much what they're going to find or what they're not going to find. They also just have to come to you and be like, here is what I found, and you need to take that, too, as your findings and your research.
Absolutely. You know? Yeah, absolutely. I definitely did have to do that. And as much as I was facilitating, I do really like try and dial back saying like semi-facilitate, because a lot of it was on their own. Yeah. And also like I was co-facilitating with the earth. That's like true. I was really trying to just provide tool and structure, but enough that they knew where to go, but not so much that like they were locked in or pigeonholed into exactly what I was saying. That's right. You know, it was like you have the freedom to move and be exactly how you want to be. I'm going to give you some bookends, some framework here, but the rest of it's up to you, right? Like what is this exploration? What does it look like? How does it feel? You know, and I guarantee, and this came up in the last focus group, was like, if you went and did this again in a new sit spot or in a new season, right, it would be totally different. Yeah. Right. And like day to day we change. So like, I don't know what, you know, was necessarily going on in their lives, you know, personal lives, right? Outside of this, but I'm sure that was integrated into it naturally, right? Like we're a whole person. And so the idea of like, this can help with more than just, you know, the environment. This can help heal the self, which opens up this aha moment for helping, you know, the other and the more than human. And
I find like, I try my best to still teach those same aspects of just like, because if I'm just teaching asana, I want people to just like, I want everyone to close their eyes and not pay attention to what others are doing and just do whatever you want. Like I don't really, a lot of the times I'll just say like, just move however. It doesn't need to be or look or feel yogic or whatever. You know what I mean? Like don't feel like, oh, I read a yoga book or I saw a yoga video and I must move this way. Like if you just want to do a weird little thing on the floor, like do a little weird thing on the floor, you know, and sometimes that's what you want. That's what your body wants. And so it's nice to hear you say like, oh, I want them to do whatever they feel, whatever comes to them, because I feel that everything is sometimes so it's very fixed in that way where it's like, or people are nervous, like they're nervous, whatever. So this was probably a nice thing where people are by themselves. Yeah. And they don't feel worried that others are looking at them or judging or perceiving them in a strange way.
And that did come up. The first couple sessions, some of my participants came back and they're like, I had no idea how like uncomfortable I was going to feel just sitting in nature. Yeah. You know, like one of the first activities was just like grounding in place, and we went through a sensation activity called synesthesia.
You'll have to explain what that is all about afterwards. But
and so I was having them go through this activity, and they were like, wow, that took me a few tries. I was really uncomfortable. I didn't want to close my eyes, But then they said, then I did, and then I, slowly, all of a sudden, the breath calmed, I calmed. There's like this thing that happens.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, synesthesia itself is pretty cool. It's like the blending of senses.
Okay.
So rather than just, you kind of start by focusing on one sense at a time, and then you try to play with what would it be like if you could. Like if I said I could smell the salty air, right? I'm sitting there and I'm smelling the salty air, and then I'm starting to think, okay, what if I could see the salty air? Like, what would it be like if I could see the salty air? What would it be like if I could hear the salty air? So you start to kind of trick the mind into like, whoa, what if I like felt that sense in every way? Like, how whole is that experience, right? And what is it like? And then it's funny, like more often than not, you actually can, or feel like you truly can meld the sense into like that full experience. Right. So yeah, pretty cool.
And that you found that practice through your studies, or was it something that was taught to you from another teacher?
Yeah, so that particular activity was taught to me through an educator that I had at Royal Roads University during my program.
Right.
We did an eco-psychology course, and that goes pretty deep.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah, it was so wonderful.
Right.
It felt like it was learning, like inner learning, pretty deep stuff. I spent a lot of days crying.
Yes, yeah, as you do.
Powerful, right? Powerful.
Yeah.
And it really comes from the work of David Abram. And he is a wonderful, if you haven't read his book, I'll have to get the name for you later.
Sometimes you forget the book in the moment, but we'll link everything at the end.
Okay,
It'll all be there.
He honestly fabulous, probably one of my favorite authors. He is a deep ecologist and just speaks so beautifully about sensations. Oh, spell of the sensuous.
Okay.
But he speaks so beautifully about perception, and in a lot of ways, that's what I'm doing in this research is a shift in perception, or that transformational change. And that was where kind of the yoga blended with the ecology, was coming into that deep ecology, or some people call it spiritual ecology. And so Dave Abram is one of the key players for inspiring this research.
And that practice came also from then.
He talks about it in one of his books.
Nice.
There,
Right. So special. I haven't heard of that before, but it sounds like something I would like to do.
Yeah,
It sounds very nice.
Yeah, it's kind of like a people do like a grounding exercise. If you're feeling anxious or whatever, they'll, like name one thing you can hear, two things you can smell, three things you can, so it kind of takes that and then like builds on it, you know, in a way that you're able to feel a more full experience.
Right. And that was something that people were practicing like on their own, like you taught them of this, and then they were able to remind themselves of the practice.
Absolutely.
And then when they were going into nature and not sure maybe what to do or feeling anxious, then they found this.
You got it. It was probably the single most repeated activity that I taught, honestly.
I think for good reason. You know, I feel I haven't really heard of that before, and it sounds like you said like tricking the mind a little bit, but I feel like it's one of those ways that really does get you out of the too much of a critical thinking mind, or overanalyzing, or even judgmental mind, and gets you into a different type of place. Similar to how, you get out of the mind when you're in like a super difficult posture.
Sure.
It's similar to that, where you're like, okay, well, I'm like, yes, I'm feeling anxious, or it's just too much going on. But you don't have a lot of thought when you're all like really complicatedly placed, like, standing on your head or whatever it is. There isn't much room for a lot of thought that is either positive or negative or whatever. It's that essence of presence, right? It's like, okay, I have to be here.
I have to. And that's the synesthesia piece allows for playfulness too, I think, because it's not, it is structured, but it's not. It's like, oh, can I smell what I can see? Like, can I touch what I can taste? Like, I don't know.
Right, you might discover like so much too that like, yes, I can. And like it's like if somebody told you like, no, you can only see that. You know, like somebody is just going to come in with that belief and you start to practice and you're like, no, there's so much more to be experienced than like what people might think or what somebody might tell you. And also to not just fall into you know, what you've heard on like the first kind of introduction when somebody tells you something. Like if someone tells you they're like, no, this is fact, and you're like, no, this is fact. Like, there's something else here, there's other things here, like, you
absolutely.
know, some people would say, no, you can't see the salt here, and I'm like, yes, I can.
Yeah.
You know,
let me tell you.
That's right.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
Busted.
absolutely. Yeah, it was a really fantastic experience, like being able to explore or witness other people explore a transformation that, you know, I think in the beginning, the articulation of the experience was really, really hard. And what I started to see was like, you know, in week 3 or 4, participants were able to articulate week 1 and 2 a lot better. Like they were creating the language or they were learning the language they needed to be able to express what was happening to them previously, right? And it just kept getting more colorful and more poetic and more deep. Like that was, you know, that's one of the really big things that I talk about a lot in the research is this exploration of depth. And it was multi-dimensional. So there was this depth from, you know, lower S self to the uppercase S self, ecological self. And then there was also this depth and expansiveness. So, you know, connecting to yourself and then also out into the world. Right. And it was going in all these different ways at the same time. And it didn't necessarily, it wasn't like it was progressive. It wasn't like it was always getting deeper. Right? Some days things were going on and it was like, oh, we're back to this very cognitive mental place where like all I care about right now is that I'm wet and upset. You know, like
right.
You know, and that's fine. Like things take you out of those more deep experiences, right? And so then we have things like synesthesia or you know, other activities that can bring you back in.
Yes, of course.
Right? So having the ability to drop in and out at the same time was really cool.
And for people to find the grace in themselves, that going back into that more kind of, I guess if you want to call it, let's just say surface level place, that's a lot easier. It's really easy to be there. It's like easy to be in that place of like, I'm upset and wet or whatever, you know, like that's kind of your more natural zone to be. It's what you've known most of your life. It takes a lot of work to like just remain in capital S self all the time or like primarily. It's very challenging. It's not something that most of us are able to really do. You know, you might just have like glimpses of it. And so for people, to give themselves grace, because sometimes I think when people join programs, they can be hard on themselves during the program when they like revert back to those like default settings or whatever. And they're like, wait a minute, like I'm supposed to be making progress here or whatever, you know. And so that it's not linear. You know, there's ups and downs and it's kind of just all over the place.
Totally thinking about things circular or spiral is like way more humbling, I think, than and it does give you the grace that you're talking about, because otherwise it's like we're just looking at this linear line that's like, well, how come I'm not always growing, or how come I'm not always getting better, right? Like, what does better look like? You know,
and that there is growth in that challenge. You know, and you're seeing it differently. I find too, when you are immersed in this type of program, you see it differently. For yourself, you're like, oh, wait a minute, like I'm reflecting on the fact that I'm cold and wet or whatever it is, when you normally might not even really realize that you're annoyed about that. You know. Do you have some kind of examples or some of your ones that stuck out for you of like people starting to become like getting into that depth with themselves? Like, was there something that like a certain one that really like was powerful for you or like moved you quite a bit? Or probably more than one, but
there's a couple that come to mind. I think it started with that depth of self, right? So seeing themselves with the earth and sort of feeling connected in that sense. But then the expansiveness is what really those examples that were shared with me really were really powerful. Like one I can think of is a participant talking about, you know, had been sitting in their sit spot for 5 weeks now, and they looked up and the tree had a lost limb and there was a bunch of sap coming out, and they were like starting to get quite emotional about it, thinking like, oh, you know, this tree and I aren't so different, and it, you know, we both have nutrients that like flow through our bodies, and it's essentially bleeding at this lost limb, you know, and was just like seeing that relationship and connecting and like, I can't believe, you know, like, you know, speaking for this participant, they couldn't believe they'd been sitting there for that long and hadn't noticed this like wound, you know, per se. And so just learning to see yourself in others and then the other in the self was really quite powerful.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think that's one of the best parts about going back. And what is this thing that you call it? Sorry, going back to the same place.
Site sitting, or a sit spot.
Sit spot, but also
place responsiveness.
Thank you. Yeah. Doing that type of I guess practice, if you want. I don't really know.
Work.
Yeah, right. And being able to return back to those places to not only witness change, but I think that of course, you know, as we do, you know, you start to connect and like have an emotional feeling about the place that you're in, because it's, you know, without really thinking about it too much, you're like, oh well, it's like mine, it's my place. Totally. It's like where I go, and like it is safe, it's familiar, it's whatever, and yes, and now like this tree that I've sat with, like, oh, something happened to it, you know, last night, and like, oh, that's sad for it, and then you start thinking about that differently. Whereas if you just notice that, you might not have that same emotional connection or feeling.
No, absolutely.
To just a random tree feeling like that.
And it evokes this sense of wonder, like, oh, what's the story? You know, like what happened here, and how much longer has that tree been here, and what does that tree witness that I haven't witnessed? Like, you know, this tree's sit spot forever.
Yeah, true.
Like,
you know,
what is
like,
it?
My place responsiveness is very good.
Yeah.
It's just, I've been here. I've been doing the practices.
Totally. So what I was going to mention, something else that came up and with that sort of place responsiveness is one of the research questions. I'll see if I can find it here. How might an intentional and consistent outdoor eco-yoga practice cultivate a heightened awareness of, responsiveness to, and emotional resonance with the ecological environment?
Okay.
So when I explored that research question, what ended up coming out was sort of this model there was sort of an order to it, and it was this awareness first. So we started with ecological awareness. It was like, you know, that Gaia, that whole Mother Earth, that outer ring. And it was, okay, I'm in this place, right? I'm aware of this place. I see myself sitting here. I see myself on the land. I see whatever's around you, right? But then over time, the responsiveness came, right? As you were getting at, like, you return to the same spot, you're witnessing in the same spot. So you start to get responsive. And that's where the conversation piece comes in. That's where the reciprocal relationship comes in, right? Like, oh, I was here yesterday and I saw, you know, this branch do this, right? Look, what is, you know, can you be having conversation? Is the wind sharing something with you? Like, you know, even if it's just, it's windy today, right? And you can get as spiritual with it as you want, but you don't have to, right? You know, it could be just, oh, I'm noticing that it's windy today, right? Or it could be like, you know, some sort of signal, some kind of sign, some sort of, you know, spiritual essence. You can be asking questions and having this conversation. And, you know, I want to keep it open to everyone, so it doesn't need to be like that, but it can be.
Yes.
And then that sort of led into this emotional resonance, which also you touched on. Yeah. Which is over that duration of time and that repeated visit, after you felt responsive to place, after there was that reciprocal relationship that was developed, you know, you felt like you were giving and taking, that you were receiving from the earth, and you were also offering something to the earth. And that was embedded in the curriculum. You know, I had them doing different sort of place practices when they arrived and when they left, to sort of say hello and goodbye. Yeah. But you do start to develop this emotional resonance, this emotional connection, right? This sense of care, and sense of wanting to do good, right? Or be a good steward of the land.
Yes.
And so I, you know, as this research as the findings sort of came to an end and I had to finish the pilot program, it was like, oh, could we add another one at the end of all of this, where it's like, you know, some sort of stewardship piece. You know, like action, like can all of this, can the awareness, can the responsiveness, and this emotional connection, you know, it has the potential to offer action from this place of holistic understanding, from this place of just feeling. Yes. Right? Yeah, so simple, so accessible. All of these practices are so accessible. Right. You don't need anything. You just need somewhere to sit.
Yeah, you know? That's it. Well, and see the difference too in like what you experience with, everybody that participated is, at the beginning, you did have some people saying, I didn't realize how uncomfortable it is for me to just sit here in nature or whatever. And by the end of it, you have a completely different person with a different mindset, different view, different understanding. And maybe that person, even though they care about the environment, let's say 6 weeks ago, or 8 weeks ago, they might have, they care about the environment, but now there's this other feeling, and they might, care more. They already care, but they might care more now because they've developed this relationship with the place, with themselves and earth, that like interconnectedness that exists, and so it is a really beautiful time to bring that type of practice in, or to bring that stewardship in for people.
Absolutely. I'm just seeing if I can pull up some of those metaphors for you, because I have that exact sort of thing,
Similar.
that transcendence that you're talking about. So, in the first focus group, maybe I'll just share one example.
Of course, please.
In the first focus group, I asked what their relationship with the earth was, what the land was.
Right. And this is before they started?
Before they started the program.
Okay.
So my current relationship with the ecological environment, it's like moss on a tree. I feel as though I'm more of the moss and the host is the tree, giving and taking. And they said, as of right now, I'm more taking from the host than I'm giving back.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So according to the participant, at the end of the program, even though their relationship of moss on the tree remained the same, they started to perceive less negativity towards, and more positivity towards their relationship.
Right.
Right? So there was still this give and take. They were still acknowledging that give and take.
Yeah.
But they weren't being as hard on themselves for only being able to do as much as they were able to do.
Right.
Right? So like, that shift is pretty powerful,
yes,
I think, on like an internal level.
Of course.
And that's just, one participant out of the 4. Like, they all came up with their own. We worked a lot with metaphor for this research, because I think it's just it offers more depth in explaining
and
how
interpretation. For people, right? Because you're working with different people, and it is nice to be able to offer that openness for people to take it however they'd like to.
Yeah. So you're right. I think that does happen. You're whatever the shift is. You're able to, with metaphor, kind of grasp onto that. Yeah,
for sure. And you had actually in there, I wrote down some things that I really liked that you had shared. And let me see which one it is. Oh, yes. Okay, so it's on page 15, and I just clipped it out. I don't know how much this is going to make sense, but I just clipped it out. It says, research suggests that the more immersed in the living world you become, the more likely you are to express an experience of spiritual connection with that place, which weaves its way into our next section, which I guess is obviously, that doesn't make too much sense, but that's what you're talking about, that it starts to weave its way into the next part of the thesis. And so I liked that, because it was something I had always experienced myself when I went into nature, and I wasn't always feeling very necessarily yoga related, but it's all yoga, so it doesn't really matter. But like I love going into nature by myself, or going for a walk by myself. I would prefer to go by myself for the most part, because I'm able to have that deeper understanding, or that spiritual feeling, or I do get really emotional when I'm by myself, and I will have like a happy moment, or a dancing moment, or a crying moment, or whatever. And so when I read that, I was like, okay, I always knew it was a thing, but I couldn't quite place it. And I've talked about it a lot in my own stuff, like with my yoga teachings and stuff. I talk about it to my students, and I talk about it. And so to read that, like, if you have more to share on that, or just how this touches on that exact same thing. It's that people are getting immersed into nature, and they are able to have more spiritual experiences.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
it actually gave me some goosebumps,
Oh.
some warm fuzzies, because
Yes,
that
of
is
course.
like what this work is. And I think just sharing, everyone has that experience. Right? Everyone has an experience in nature where they've gone outside and they've just, you can't even really explain it.
No.
Right? Like it's a sunset, it's it's the moon, it's, even a leaf, one particular leaf, like, it doesn't matter.
Well, it gets you.
It gets you. So here's what I think. This is why I think this research is so special. And I, after doing the 200-page thesis, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out how can I articulate this really in a short and sweet way. Because you start to think, what did I do?
Well, I was thinking about that for you, because I'm not much of I've been to university, but I dropped out because I don't think that way. Like, I can't write a book like that.
Sure.
And so, like, for me, I was like, oh my gosh, how did she put this all together? Like,
it's complex.
And you get lost. Yeah, it is complex. And I was like, man, I'm so proud of her for having this good brain that can just do these things.
Well, you know, sometimes I'm weaving the web, and I think I kind of explain it like, you know, when you're playing a board game and we're going to go down this tangent now.
Yeah.
But you know, when you're playing a board game and you're like, it's a strategy game and you can see like 2 moves ahead and you're like, oh, cool. Like, I kind of know where I'm going to go. Like, I see my vision.
Yeah.
For me, if I have to start going like 5, 6 moves ahead, I'm lost. That's too far.
It's too far.
And it was the same with this research. Like, as I was moving my way through it, I could see like the bigger picture. I could always see that things were connecting, and I couldn't always like articulate it. But as I started to write things down, as I started to like get the data and talk to my participants and you know, hear their story, I was like, oh, that's where this ties in. Like, that's you know, I was making those connections. So really, a lot of what this research was just making those connections. But all this to say, when I kind of deduced my 200 pages down, I think it's so special because it's taking an innate experience. So this experience of just walking outside alone, right?
Right.
It's something that's perceived, you know, maybe we perceive that spiritual experience as extraordinary, right? It's something that's a little bit different. It's out of our ordinary, right? And without taking any of the magic away, this research reveals the accessibility to those experiences. Right? So it illuminates the magic that's embedded in the ordinary.
Right.
And that's what I think is so special about this research.
Yeah.
Is you're taking something that's perceived as extraordinary and you're just showing people that it's actually so ordinary.
Yes.
And we live in such a magical, beautiful place, and like you can find that.
Well, and the wisdom that there is in that, of just like that you don't need things to be extraordinary to find the beauty or the wonder or the extraordinary in them.
It
like
goes
the
both
most
ways.
ordinary things are usually the most incredible things in the world, you know? And like finding that understanding and the wisdom in that view. Having that view.
Absolutely. No, I feel very strongly that way, obviously. But
you don't say.
But I just think that, you know, I've taken it on myself, maybe to my work in service is sharing that with others.
Right.
You know, bringing that into the world in as many different ways as I can, and I don't know exactly where all those little pockets are for me now.
Right.
Like, I know there's definitely room for this eco-yoga, eco-embodiment in the yoga world. Because it's all yoga. It just much, it overlaps so much, and the symmetry is there. But I think, you know, I'd love to see it in office spaces. I'd love to see it where people don't necessarily, you know, even know what yoga is. You know, let me bring you embodiment. Let me show you sensation and breath, and you know what that is. But let me let me facilitate it in a way that you maybe haven't had it facilitated to you before.
Yeah, of course, you know, and to be taught in that way that is really well-rounded with just the entire experience of being a being, you know, and teaching breath, because like you said, you know, people know what that is, but not to the full understanding or capacity that they maybe could, or that you might have that knowledge, you know, and I think it is going to really matter to bring that into spaces for people and offices or whatever, you know, because I find too, like, if I go to my corporate yoga, it is like that. I'm like, even the people in there sometimes, they're like, you know, you're just under these like lights and it's very abrasive and like synthetic and whatever, and it is very important to be able to go outside and be able to have an experience, not just like go for a walk on their break, which is very good, but to have it be even further than that, even more in depth than that, and introduce them to these different ways of thinking and being. So that's my mission now, is like how do I share this, right?
You know, because I know not everyone's gonna read a 200 page book.
Once they understand what it's about, they will.
Maybe, yes.
Once they hear this episode, they're gonna be like, whoa, I need to read this book. I gotta get it. Is there a hard copy?
Yeah.
I need to order the hard copy.
Link to that below.
That's right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. You know?
No, absolutely. I want to package it up in as many ways as I can, and you know, this podcast is amazing because it's revealing it in a lighter sense,
right.
You know, giving it a little bit more of a story,
right.
That people are like, oh yeah, let's hear more about this,
yeah.
or let's see what those activities were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the thesis itself includes the companion guide that went along with the research in the back.
Nice. Yeah,
you know,
that's
so
good.
if people wanted to look at what that companion guide was, what week 1 entailed, those activities, right. It's all in there. So
right.
you know, people can look at it and explore it on their own.
Yeah. Did you lead any other ones like since the one that you did for your study and stuff like that?
Yeah, so since doing the pilot program for the research, I haven't facilitated a full session.
Right.
I'm hoping in the new year to facilitate probably my first official session.
Right.
And I'll probably keep it virtual so that, you know, it's open to anyone, anywhere.
That's nice too, because, you know, what I find is you need the accessibility, like just to be able to like gain access to basically anybody with virtual stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, like even though yes, you are teaching people to like go and do their own things, they don't need to rely on the class to be happening in person or online.
No.
They are just like able to go on their own and put these things into practice and start experiencing them for themselves.
Yeah.
And you're there as like a wonderful help and guide for that. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. I think it's, you know, the experience is your own, and then I'm just there to help you reflect, right? And I do that in the least intrusive way that I can, just, you know, listening and responding, you know, with any knowledge that I think I could share, but mostly listening.
Yes, and what you've like learned too, because of course I feel like every time that you apply it, you're going to learn something new, and also things change, like what you mentioned earlier too. Like it reminds me of when I was teaching the sutras. I found that I was teaching them, and like I don't really, like I know a little bit about them, but I don't know like a lot, of course. Like I'm just new to this understanding, and I even said to the people I was teaching that like we can talk about what this sutra may work out to be or translate whatever, but it will also change just as you move through your life and you have a new experience to now relate to with that sutra, or you're now another completely different version of yourself. And there is that room for people to explore and change, and like a metamorphosis, of course, too. And that, you know, they're going to experience that with nature as well, because it's just always, nothing's ever static. It's always just shifting. It's always just moving along. And so what I think is really beautiful about what you've put together is also that. And that people can have that space and room and also, I guess, freedom, if you will, to explore. And have
come back to it whenever you want, right? Like it's there for you, and you can, you know, if you have a favorite week, a favorite session, just do that one. Like you know, it's an hour of your time, and you can shorten it, play with it as much as you want. So the idea was to just make it as accessible as possible, and just give people the tools to sort of navigate this time that we're living in, that is, you know, there's no denying the amount of eco-anxiety that and grief and everything that, you know, amongst other things that are going on in this world. Like, it's a hard time to navigate.
That's right.
And without the ability to talk about how we're feeling, without the ability to know how the body is talking, right? To not know what you're feeling inside, like that's hard.
It is hard, you know, and I think that one of the best things that you can do when you feel unsure or anxious or whatever, what are the things that you can do? Gain further understanding and knowledge. You know, and so if you feel anxious or worried or stressed about something, how can I educate myself further in this so that I feel more comfortable about it? Or how do I gain further understanding of why where does my anxiety even come from? What is the root of that? Why do I feel anxious about this certain thing? And to gain that deeper understanding of the self. And it allows you to move in and through it. Because you can't really change anything that you're not acknowledging, or that you don't have the knowledge to work with. You need that experience.
Exactly. Yeah. How are you supposed to articulate it if you haven't ever really tried or ever been told to try and explore it,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
That made me think about, maybe I'll just finish with kind of these, or come wrapping up.
Yeah, right.
to the emergent dimensions that came out of the research and the findings, because I think it does speak to that. So I talk about embodied language,
right?
And it was meant to be an extension of body language. So it's drawing on present and intuitive perceptions as you interact with the more than human world, so that are non-human beings in the earth itself. So how can you articulate that experience, but then also what are you receiving, right? So it's kind of that give and take, like in the body, what do you know right now, right? Like what are you saying below the head, right? Like you know, in the heart space, but also like what else is the body telling you? It's embodied, okay? And then that sort of led into this idea of knowledge, which is a bit of a play on words and it's sometimes a little funny to say. But
I saw that actually. It's good that you bring that up, because I saw that pretty early on in the thesis itself, or whatever, you know. That's good that you, because I was actually going to ask you about that. I forgot about that. Go ahead.
Knowledge. So I just wanted to emphasize the and we've alluded to this already today, but emphasize the importance of presence, but also just being able to feel like knowledge doesn't have to exist in a book. It doesn't have to be quote unquote fact. It can be your lived experience.
It's very important to share that.
Because it doesn't have to be lesser than. It can be equal to, and they can work in tandem. Like to say that, you know, knowledge is just as important as knowledge is so fair. Like we're complex humans, we exist in all these different dimensions. And so I just wanted to have a phrase to sort of talk about the findings from my research and what participants were saying, and you know how important that idea of presence, you know, being present and then being able to share that experience of what is happening for me now. So we have this embodied language, and then we're working with our knowledge, like what's going on for me right now, presently. And you know, also helps us to make meaning and interpret what's going on, widening perspectives. So that comes into the articulation of what's going on for me, right? So as I was talking to participants, like I said, it was like every week they were getting just stronger and stronger at being able to articulate themselves, because they were, you know, deeper in this embodied language. They were starting to accept to some extent, you know, within themselves, this power of knowledge and how that manifested for them. And then ultimately this came out, this idea of reverent reflection. So understanding the value of all life and being conscious of our alikeness, right? Celebrating uniqueness, but also seeing how much we are kin. Right. So without knowledge, the idea is without knowledge and without this embodied language, you know, we might lose out on some of this reverence and some of this care and love for others and ourselves, but the earth.
That's very special, actually, you know. And I was curious when I saw that word, like I had an idea of what you were getting at, you know. And I was like, okay, so how do we put this into practice, I guess? And
what does it mean?
What does it all mean, you know? Like, and so it's really nice to hear. And that presence is challenging. No matter what, I feel like that presence is challenging. And even more so, I find that, you know, it's sometimes, for the most part, for most people, easy to place, like, I feel sad. Like, that's sometimes can be easy to place. But the, like, further investigation as to either why or how that's coming about, or to place, like you had said it earlier, and I don't remember how you said it, but it was in the same way, like referencing, like, okay, I felt this way. Okay, so like, what does it feel like to feel that way? And that is really, really hard. To be like, how does it feel to feel that way? And then like, why? And what's the root? And like,
and you're sitting with it, and it can be heavy. It can be light and beautiful and powerful. Yes. We all love those experiences, right? But it can be heavy. We ain't talking about those.
We're talking about the tough stuff. It can be very heavy.
It can be. It totally can be. So, you know, how can you use these tools in a way that allows you to navigate that more comfortably? And I've found that sight sitting this practice of place responsiveness is a great tool because it's localized. So you're sitting there, you're looking around, and in this tiny little spot in the forest, you know, everything looks lush and beautiful. And, you know, wherever you are in the world, I appreciate I'm in a rainforest, so I say lush, but, you know, wherever you are, it just feels, it's a safety, it's a place of safety and comfort, nestled, right? Right. And then, you know, from there, you can sort of start to build out and expand. And okay, you know, how does this apply? How can we, you know, save just this? Just this tiny little neck of the woods, you know, and then building off of that, right? So finding comfort, and then before you try and dream too big, you know, not that we shouldn't dream big, but just like maybe that's too overwhelming of a place to start.
It's nice to collect your stuff and then go, you know, like get everything in order, kind of understand that, whatever, and then go, because it is, I find still too, it's the same thing. It's overwhelming no matter what, but it's even more so overwhelming when you don't have the knowledge and you don't have the things that you feel like I'm ready. You know, and that's why I feel like you cannot rush any sort of thing, yoga, not yoga, whatever it is in your life, your business, your not business. You have to feel like, some people say to me like, oh, I should have done it. I haven't done it and I've been meaning to. And I'm like, just like, it'll come when it comes, because you cannot make yourself be ready for something. It just shows itself to you. And then you go with it, and that's the right time. That's when you feel like, I have enough now to understand that I can move forward with this, you know. And I feel like we see that a lot with every area actually, every area of whatever it is people are interested in or wanting to take a leap into or whatever, you know.
A lot of that comes down to, again, the emotion and the sensation, though, right? Like we're told or taught, or we see so much, like, just keep going, keep moving. Let's not, you know, like, this is what you're doing now, and that's just the way it is. And it's like, well, I don't know, I wasn't really ready, or maybe you were ready, but then it was kind of a scary feeling, so you turned away from it.
That's right.
Okay, but that scary feeling might have been something where you could have jumped in, right? Like, how learning the language of the body, learning this embodied language is like giving you the roadmap for when and, you know, how to navigate those spaces, because you're having that conversation between mind and body.
Well, and checking in with yourself to be like, I feel okay, I feel prepared for that. I'm not rushing into something that's going to lead me down a path that I'm like I don't know how to even handle yet, or I don't feel like I could right now, you know. Did you find, I just want to share, like, if you have any further shares or like feedback that you received from people that were part of it, or even the smaller ones that you've done, or even your teachers, or like those who, you know, that you worked under, what was their, because to me, I feel like what you've come up with here, and why I said at the beginning, like, and in general, that I like love talking to you about this stuff, or that I was looking forward to, because I feel like what you've come up with, and what I've seen also on your Instagram from comments and stuff, that people are like, this is so special, this is so unique, you've come up with something so wonderful, and people are like stoked on it, you know, whatever. And so I'd be curious to know, like, what your like teachers and whoever you like, you know, worked with or under, like, thought about it in and of itself, or even the feedback from those who were involved.
I mean, the feedback has been good, and there's definitely, and this speaks to how we opened today's podcast, really, is like it's needed, you know, like there's something that it's speaking to, that there's interest for it, and it's just a matter of how I, you know, and I hate to say like package it up, but like it has to be packaged up in a way that people can, you know, bite-size grab at it. So that's sort of the space that I'm navigating now, because the feedback from participants was, you know, this is great, you know, even to the extent, as I shared, like, well, now what, how do I keep doing this? And I'm like, I can't forever, but like, you know, I'm in service, and I will do this work, and I feel like this is my work to share, and I want others to share it, and so, you know, I hope that it keeps sort of infiltrating kindly into all these spaces, you know,
in the nicest way possible.
In the nicest way, infiltrate, such a hard word, but
that's okay.
You know what I mean? Like, just, you know, sweetly tiptoeing.
Integrate, just a little softer or whatever.
That's right. I did want to share, maybe I just took out one little section from the thesis that I thought I would share. There's a couple quotes in it from two deep ecologists, so Bill Plotkin and Joanna Macy, but I'll share their words and mine here. So, finding spaces that honor our felt experiences aids in the revitalization of emotion, which, as Bill Plotkin argues, enables our greatest contribution to a cultural renaissance. So this is what I think, like, this research is really offering. It's feeding into this cultural renaissance that I think we're really all, in need of. We're looking for now. So I've situated my research within the context of this cultural shift as a means to enliven the animate parts of ourselves and the earth. Similarly, Joanna Macy explains, our lack of collective self-healing is, in part, due to society being driven by profit rather than well-being. Without the proper infrastructure, physical exhaustion and moral despair builds within the collective consciousness and, as Macy says, erodes a community's sense of wholeness and continuity. To bolster our cultural immune system, we need to recall who we are and what we love. So that's what I'm trying to do. Bring back the sense of love for ourselves and each other. And I just think that those two speakers, Bill Plotkin and Joanna Macy, are really highlighting what it was that I was looking to do with this work.
Right.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much.